Try to just unpack all the layers that are involved in this just horrible tragedy. We are trying to find voices that can really lend just some real weight to what we're talking about here. People who understand what it's like to be in the cockpit or be around aviation. And we're happy to be joined right now by John Gagliano. He is an aviation attorney and also a pilot, to walk us through what might have happened here. Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Good morning. What can you tell us when you saw this come in last night? What went through your head from your vantage point as a pilot and as a pilot?
Yeah, there are sophisticated anti-collision technologies on these aircraft called TCAS. And so the first thought in my head was, why didn't TCAS prevent that? And as you kind of go through it, TCAS does not work close to the ground. There's something called a TCAS inhibit. And because there's a lot of traffic near airports, air traffic and airplane traffic, that function does not work below 1,000 feet.
So would that have been both on that helicopter? Does a military aircraft, does that follow different rules as far as commercial aircraft here? We're told they were in communication with each other, is what we had heard from the Transportation Secretary. But can you speak to that?
Well, they all follow the same rules, and those are federal aviation's regulations, and they also follow the same commands from the same air traffic controllers. And so the military does talk to civilian FAA controllers. There's not a separate military control system in the national airspace of the country.
Okay.
And John, when you hear from the American Airlines CEO, Robert Isom, say, you know, we don't know why the military aircraft came into the path of the PSA aircraft, what is going through your mind with your expertise and your in-depth knowledge?
Well, the military aircraft is supposed to hug the east bank of the river, and they're supposed to operate at a different altitude and in a different airspace than the arrivals into Reagan. And the airlines, and they're also operating on not a strictly defined path in the sky via instruments, right? They're looking at the bank, they're operating visually in the helicopter, and in the American flight, they're operating on GPS guidance to the runway. So there is a very strict and defined approach criteria into Reagan on where that aircraft needs to be, and if it's not in the right place at the right time, and I'm talking about the American aircraft, then it needs to get out of the way and go around. The military helicopter has a little bit more leeway in where it can operate. Now, everyone is supposed to be visually separated, and the Black Hawk reported that it did see the American flight, but I'm convinced that there's no way that Black Hawk saw the American flight, or they saw something they thought was the American flight, but they didn't actually see it.
And John, you mentioned about the visual. At nighttime flying, when you're flying as a pilot, I want your pilot perspective on this. At nighttime when you're flying, if you see these big lights in the sky, obviously it's something that's in your path. And you said that, if I'm understanding you correctly, they did the visual inspection, but something clearly went wrong here, where they ended up, colliding into each other?
Well, the air traffic controller instructed the Army helicopter about where the American flight was and required him to see it and avoid it. And the military helicopter said that he saw the American flight, but clearly he didn't avoid it. That leads me to believe that he did not see the flight, but he saw something else that he thought was the American flight. The skyline at D.C. is really bright with all different kinds of colors, red and white and blue, as you know, and all other kinds of colors, and it can be confusing depending on where you're looking, what altitude you are. I'm convinced at this point that the Army helicopter, when he said to the FAA controller that he saw the flight, that he didn't actually see this flight.
Before we let you go, John, the path forward, we've heard from the people at the news conference that will be covered by the NTSB. We know the fuselage has been located. In 10 seconds, can you just let us know what happens next?
Yeah. Look, there's sorrow, obviously. There's thanks, and there's inquiry. So where there's sorrow for the loss of life and to the families, there's thanks for the first responders, and there's inquiry into the NTSB investigation. Obviously, lawmakers are going to look at this, and there's going to be findings and hopefully solutions.
John Gagliano, aviation attorney and pilot, thank you so much.